And now please welcome Amon Milner with Recoding the Rules.
I learned early on that rules work in different ways at different places. My parents lived in separate homes, and each one had different rules for me to follow. Mom's place, don't you dare go into any of my stuff. Dad's place, you can use whatever you want, but they better be exactly where I left them when I get back. I was a little scared to use the recliner at his house. I found that their rules had some wiggle room. For example, my mom had a lot of pairs of these. I didn't know what they were called or how much they cost, but I did know one thing. They were just the perfect elasticity for my slingshot experiments. I may have snapped a pair or two trying to achieve the perfect transfer from potential to kinetic energy, but it was in the name of science. If my contraption of the day got a laugh out of my mom when she came home, I could escape the punishment of going through her stuff. But I knew what may or may not happen to me at home when I broke a rule. But I actually didn't know what would happen to a grown-up if they bent or broke a rule out in the world. I was with my dad and my cousin at an amusement park, and we spotted the big coaster. The line was huge. It was a mass of people snaking through a 4-level deck. Dad knew that he wouldn't be able to keep a sight line on us in that line. But we begged him to let us go. Please, Dad, a big roller coaster, please. So he did what any good parent would do. He waited with us. But his neck wasn't as rubbery as our little necks. He knew that. His plan was to wait with us until he got to the ride. And then he'd go down the exit stairs and meet us at the bottom. Which is when Dad collided with an invisible rule. The ride operator said Dad couldn't take the stairs. And Dad, with what looked to me like the poise he regularly presented as a professor, he suggested multiple good reasons why a responsible parent without a roller coaster friendly stomach or a whiplash friendly neck should be allowed to make a dignified exit while his kiddos enjoyed the buffet of loop-de-loops and hair turn twists. The ride operator wasn't interested in logical debate. What he was interested in was calling the cops. Now granted, they were carnival cops, so I wasn't quite sure what they were authorized to do. But it looked like they were handcuffing him, oh so ironically taking him down the stairs were off limits to him 2 minutes before. And the no dads on the stair rule must have been the foundational precept of carnival cops school, because these cops seemed a whole lot more attentive to that and less attentive to the common sense rule that an 8-year-old shouldn't be left alone at a carnival. My cousin and I were strapped in the roller coaster until we wiggled our way out to follow the white authorities who would do only who knows what to my 6-foot-tall black man dad. And who was presumably being called in for the ludicrous charge of being uppity, a made-up offense with murky metrics that has cost many of my ancestors their livelihoods and their lives. By the time I was 15-year-old, I had taken on my father's likeness, and myself fit the description. The 6-foot-tall, black male while breathing. That would get you harassed preemptively for rules that haven't even crossed your mind. But actually, the rules did end up crossing my mind quite a bit. At the age of 8, when I saw my dad detained, And then all the other encounters between 8 and 15 when I was being a kid, but realized that people became increasingly threatened by how I looked. And I would become increasingly more likely to get stopped and frisked into non-existence. And if you were me at 15, you looked like a threat not just to the police, but the civilians or any thug who thought you were someone else. And you multiply that triple threat with my mom's protectiveness and the regular rainfall in Portland, Oregon. And what you get is a whole lot of days where I needed to have something to do inside. And my favorite inside thing was programming. My first programming job in high school came about when a CEO saw my code before he saw me. He had no trouble hiring me and me coming to work after school toting my backpack. Whereas every convenience store around asked me to leave my pack at the door in fear that I would run off with their entire inventory. Which is ironic, because the code that I was writing was actually to help track and retain inventory. Granted, it was for hospitals and not for convenience stores, but in that very office, I was just one seat away from the person who was helping track and retain the people inventory in county jails. It wasn't much of a stretch to imagine that I could counter the flick of police lights with the click of my mouse, wreaking havoc by changing the release dates of an entire inmate population to next week, if I was that kind of person. But alas, I used my mouse for the powers of good, mastering the rigid rules of programming in order to rewrite how civic rules get applied, teaching the next generation to rewrite the rules of algorithms that determine who gets a loan, who gets reelected, who gets medical care, and who gets bail, in hopes of empowering the next crop of 8 to 15-year-olds to create code that makes it harder for a bad operator to ruin our ride through life.